Well, hello everyone. This is Philip Carr-Gomm. This is Tea with a Druid, brought to you by the Order of Bards of Eights and Druids. This evening I wanted to talk about something that's really central. It's a kind of key idea in spirituality, and I thought, let's just get to the heart of it and look at it. And it goes like this. We know we have a personality. We've done those personality tests, the MBTI or the Enneagram or whatever it is. We've done the personality tests, or we've talked, we know ourselves to a greater or lesser extent. So we know we have a personality in the world. But then when we settle and we kind of go inwards, or if we engage in any kind of spiritual practice, there's another part of ourselves that we locate that we might call by all sorts of different names: the deep self, the core self, the essential self, the inner self, the higher self, the over self, the over soul, the soul, all these different words. And whatever we mean by that, let's just, to make life simple for us, let's just use the term soul. So we're using, in this particular context, and I know all these words can be used in different ways in different contexts, but in this context, we're talking about the soul, this sense of our sort of core spiritual self, and the personality. And then the obvious question is, what's the relationship between the two? Are they the same thing? Well, we sort of know that they don't feel like they are. There's a difference in some way. We can get caught up in our personality traits. Our personality is that part of ourselves that has neuroses, complexes, that suffers trauma, that has difficulties sometimes, and has both upsides and downsides, and a shadow, and also unresolved areas, and so on. Lots of stuff. So it's a very rich field. And then the soul feels like this kind of core self that is attached to oneness. And when we experience a sense of oneness in meditation or in a mystical experience, we touch into it, or sometimes even if we just read about it or hear about it online or whatever, it helps us to connect to this sense of self, which is both transcendent and immanent. And by that, I mean, it feels both very central to us and right here. Maybe we sense it in our heart or in our tummy, or in the core of ourselves. But there's also a way in which it feels connected to the divine, to kind of out there, to all being, and so on. Now, of course, these deliberations will probably be familiar, I guess, to most of you. And of course, these are thoughts that have been occurring to mystics and esotericists and spiritual seekers for thousands of years. And the reason why I'm talking to you about it is because I've spent the last year working on a course in psychosynthesis. I was trained in psychosynthesis 40 years ago. And it was one of the most profound experiences I had, was learning about this spiritual psychology developed by a man called Roberto Assagioli in the early 20th century. And I became a psychotherapist. And a year ago, I was invited by the Aleph Trust, who produce MSCs in transpersonal psychology, if I would produce a course in psychosynthesis. So I've spent the last year diving into psychosynthesis and connecting with other practitioners, and reading lots of books and studying and having lots of conversations and so on. And it's ready to launch, and it's being launched in February. A couple of dozen people. So it's a small course, a few dozen people, and we'll go together. We'll take a journey in psychosynthesis, undergoing psychosynthesis ourselves, but also studying the theory and its methods and how it works and so on. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because at the heart of psychosynthesis, one way of looking at it is to say that it's about the work of working with the personality at a psychological level, and also working with the soul, and developing this relationship between these two aspects of ourself. Now, it's no coincidence that Roberto Assagioli, who was the first Freudian analyst in Italy, and then he changed to becoming the first Jungian, and then he developed his own psychology, which he called psychosynthesis. It's no coincidence that he was brought up in a theosophical family and ran various theosophical groups all through most of his life, and then came into touch with Alice Bailey, who was a teacher who developed her own teaching, the arcane school, sort of out of the theosophical stream. There's an interesting connection with Druidry, which will lead us off track, but Druidry, in the way the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids presents it, is universalist. It shares the same ideals as the Theosophical Society does in terms of trying to see the common factors in all spiritual traditions and trying to get to the truth, regardless of the labels and so on. So within Theosophy, if you look at it, there's this teaching about the rainbow bridge between the personality and the soul. And they use the term Antekharana for it. Now, Antekharana is used in Hindu philosophy to designate essentially the human mind and psychology, the lower mind, the higher mind, the memory, the discriminating mind, and so on. So it's a way of understanding the mind. Theosophists use it in a slightly different sense, and I'm going to be using it in this sense, this idea of Antekharana, the rainbow bridge. And in a sense, you could characterize spiritual teaching and following the spiritual path as simply learning how we as personalities, as individual egos, as incarnated beings, can somehow open more and more to the light of our soul, to our spiritual selves, the light of the divine. How can that shine through us into the world? And how can we fulfill our task on this earth? And the idea in these teachings is that the personality, the everyday self, when you die, is dissolved. Thank heavens, you might say, depending on how you feel about your personality, or you might be very upsetting. But the idea is the personality dissolves, but the soul, as a reincarnating self, that retains all the sort of distillation, all the things that the personality has been able to receive and learn and understand as an essence. And then the soul carries on into the next life, incarnates down into another vessel of another personality in order to learn and grow in that life, and so on. So it helps. It's one way of looking at how the journey of incarnation works, if we choose to if we find it helpful. But it's also a way of understanding the relationship between our everyday self and our spiritual self. And the idea of the spiritual path is simply to strengthen this bridge, strengthen this connection. Assagioli gives the image of the soul as being the sun, and then the personality as being a reflection of the sun, like sunlight on water. And the idea is that we can become more and more infused by the light of our soul. So in a self-realized being, their soul infuses completely their personality. Now, here's an interesting kind of distinction. So the obvious thing is when you get this idea, you say, okay, there's this interesting idea of the personality, I get it, the soul, and this bridge, this connection between the two that is the path. It's the path. And it's a bridge that I build myself rather nicely. Only you can create the bridge between your because it's an internal spiritual process, creating the bridge between your personality and your soul. So it's very empowering. And the question then is, I've just lost the thread for a moment. Let me just reconnect. So the question is how if it's this bridge, my focus is quite likely to be on the soul. It's like, oh, at the other end of this rainbow is my soul. And I'll go straight there. And we see this is one of the pitfalls on the path, I think, is that we focus, and I guess we've probably all done this, you focus so much on the spiritual path that you forget the everyday self, you put all your energy into that, and you either find your life isn't working out very well or your relationships aren't working very well because you're so one-pointed, you're so focused. And this is where you have uh, the mental health difficulties that can ensue from uh, this kind of approach to spiritual work. You have what are called as spiritual emergency, where you connect so strongly to these spiritual forces and to your soul forces, the vessel of your ego, if you like, the structure of your personality can't cope with the voltage. And one of the reasons why I followed a guru for 7 years, and that was where everybody was focused on their higher self, their soul. And I experienced such dysfunction in the community between people precisely because of this. And that was when I decided to study psychology. I thought there's something going on here that isn't healthy. People aren't looking at their shadows, if you like, using a psychological term. They're not looking at their shadows. They're not looking at the dark and difficult aspects of their personality. They're not trying to resolve their neuroses. They're just heading for the top of the mountain. And that's not a healthy thing to do. So I took a degree in psychology, and then I started training in Jungian analysis first of all, and then psychosynthesis, switched horses. And the reason why I think psychosynthesis is so valuable is it recognizes precisely what spiritual teachings recognize, which is that, yes, this is the idea. Build the rainbow bridge, bring your soul energy into your everyday life, into your everyday self. Do that. But don't ignore the everyday self. Don't ignore the personality. Just as you would say, don't ignore the body. But treat the body well, recognize it as divine, recognize it as a magical vehicle for your incarnation. And likewise with the personality. So all the strange and difficult aspects of your personality, yes, even the pain and the hardship and the suffering, all of those are there for a reason and there to be worked with. They're the prima materia, if you want to use an alchemical image, the basic matter out of which the gold is fashioned. The gold isn't created by attempting to ascend. It's created by descending into the matter and working with the matter, lighting the cauldron, uh, boiling the brew, making the brew. So old fat guy is asking, what is the everyday self? How is it different from the personality or the soul? Because these Tea with the Druid talks are by nature brief, and with whenever you start to use terminology, you can get caught up in it. And it's important to, in a way, get caught up in it and to nuance it. So for instance, in the psychosynthesis course I'm doing, we look at, what do we mean by personality? What do we mean by everyday self? What do we mean by the ego? What do we mean by the soul? What is spirit? What is the self with a capital S, which Carl Jung used and which a lot of psychosynthesis practitioners use? Is there really this separation between the two? Because, of course, the problem is when you posit this idea is you get this problem, if you like, of being split in two. Oh, there's my everyday self. Then there's this cool, groovy place, the soul. And, so these are all issues that we need to go into. But I'm trying to give a kind of broad picture here. So if you'll forgive me there, but in this sense, I'm using everyday self for personality. Let's take it as the same thing. Your everyday self, your personality. Some people might say the ego, whatever. Yeah. So how do we proceed? Do we just engage in meditation? Do we just attempt to transcend or to tune into to the deep inner self? Well, those exercises, in my belief, see what you think, are extremely helpful to connect to the soul, to use meditation or spiritual practice to open to that. But I believe it needs to be balanced with work at the emotional level, at the mental level, at the psychological level. And that's really the journey of psychosynthesis. We work at all these levels, if you like, so that the bridge is strong, so that the soul is able, so that the personality structure, the everyday self structure, becomes sufficiently cleared, sufficiently strong and resilient to be able to receive the higher voltage, if we want to use a sort of electrical analogy, of this soul, to receive the energy of the soul so that it can shine in the world. I remember early on in the days when we started the Order's teachings, a young 16-year-old boy started following our Druid course, and he got permission from his parents and his teachers as well at school. And his housemaster was amazing. He let him study the Druid teaching in his own study so he could be private and quiet. And in one of his inner meditations, this 16-year-old lad, who is now a professor of divinity at Oxford or Cambridge, received this message saying, our task is to help each other shine. And I think that's so beautiful. You know, what if our task in the world, the reason why we're here, isn't complicated? It's to help each other shine. You know, I'm spending a lot of time with my grandchildren now, and you have these little shining beings, and my job is to help them shine. I feel they help me shine, I help them shine. Mary is asking, is this the same as shadow work? How does it relate to shadow work? Well, exactly. So if you head straight for the mountaintop, you're liable, straight for the sun, you're liable to miss the extraordinary treasures that are hidden in the depths, hidden in the shadows, hidden in the darkness. Jung talked about the shadow in the sense of it's precisely what is not known, therefore we cannot talk about it in that sense. He was always against overly specific definitions of it as if we know what it is, because the whole point about it is it's the part of ourselves that we don't know that remains in the shadows. However, what we do learn, I think, in this journey is that going into the shadows, into the darkness, in appropriate ways, using the right kind of exercises and all the rest of it, can be incredibly redemptive and healing. So I hope this presentation of the Rainbow Bridge of Antekharana, of the Rainbow Bridge between the soul and the personality, is helpful. It also, for me, explains in a way the journey from the dual to the non-dual, because when you're in the realm of the personality, you're in the realm of the dual, night, day, light, dark, up and down, you know, good and bad, and so on. When you move to the level of the core self, you reach the non-dual level where there is no separation, all is one. So in this simple teaching of the Rainbow Bridge, so much comes together, I think. So I wanted to share that with you, and I wanted to share this invitation if you do feel like following this path of psychosynthesis, which incidentally helped me to understand my Druid path and helped me to sort of inform all that I had learnt from my Druid teacher with a psychospiritual understanding, which I didn't have before, so that the two meshed perfectly together. If you'd like to join a group of just a couple of dozen of us or so, starting in February, it's 9 months. We'll have a 1-month break in August next year, so that makes it, it'll go on for 10 months, but it's 9 modules over 9 months, where we'll be working interactively. We'll have 2 sessions a month, so not too arduous, every 2 weeks, something like that. Homework if you would like it, exercises that we'll all do together, as well as study and so on. Then do join me, and I'll give you the link. It's in the sort of the notes for this recording, but it would be lovely to have some familiar faces in there, and you'd be very welcome. And have a look anyway, see what you think.